Yeah, welcome back.
Right.
So I see a few people coming into the room here now. We'll give people another minute or two to join in. But in the meantime, for anyone who is new to Event Insights, my name is Chrissy. I'm head of content and community with Safe Events. And joining me today, we have Conor Ó'Cléirigh. Hi, Conor. How are you doing?
It's going, Christine. Doing well, doing well.
Good. So Conor is actually a project manager with Safe Events. The first time I've had one of our own colleagues on here, which is also nice to see. And I'm sure, judging from the attendee list, there's quite a few people here who already have met Conor and probably adore him already as well. So today, Conor is going to be talking through safety documentation for events. We'll probably have about a 20, 25-minute presentation, and then he'll have a time for a bit of a Q&A at the end. So Conor, I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Chrissy. Just get the screen share going. Cool. I'm assuming that's up and running. So, hello everyone. My name is Conor Ó'Cléirigh, for those of you that don't know me. So my topic today is going to be on the benefits and challenges of event safety documentation for event projects. So we'll have a look at different types of events and projects where I've fallen into the role of doing some documentation. We'll have a look at the challenges and benefits of doing such documentation. And we'll just have a little recap of it all at the end. So give you a quick introduction about myself. Again, we'll have a look at the various different types of projects and events you might be doing documentation for. We'll have a look at some different types of documentation, benefits, challenges, conclusion, and a little bit of time for question and answer. So a little bit about myself to start, I guess. So my event career, I guess, started when I was in school, DJing and organising at teenage discos. From then, I guess I went on and I did a Bachelor's of Science in Event Management in TUD. That involved 200 volunteer hours. So across those hours, I did kind of nightclub experience, festival experiences, DJing, corporate, tried everything really as much as I could. I realised that music and entertainment industry was kind of where my passion was. So from there, you go on, you organise your own events. We did some kind of DJ events, competitions, that type of stuff. And you go on, you do a placement. So my first placement wasn't really interested me, so I was able to apply to change and try a different one. And that's when I landed into my first safety position, which was a health and safety assistant role with Festival Republic. So that involved doing health and safety inductions, review of documentation, and I guess that's where it all really started for me. Finished off then my college degree, and after that went back to Festival Republic, did another summer season with them, this time in production. Guess I realised that the safety was more my type of job, and being out on the ground, meeting people, talking to people, helping people as best we can. So from there, I got in touch with a colleague that I'd met in my time in Festival Republic, and with the help of himself and a couple of others, managed to get the foot in the door with Safe Events. So I started there in December of 2019, which some of you might remember is possibly the worst time to start an event job ever. 4 months later, of course, COVID came along and crippled our industry. But again, that's where the documentation picked back up. So we started doing COVID test centres, documentation, SOPs on how to run events during that time. Then obviously eventually the industry opened back up. Both Ireland and Saudi really kicked off in a big way. And that kind of brings us to where we are today, which is I'm currently a project manager in Safe Events. So the type of roles that results in is kind of event control roles, so such as wild lights in the zoo, wild routes in Sligo, Dublin Pride, cross city event, and some DCC related stuff. As well as that, I do site safety roles. So examples of that would be at Soundstorm in Saudi, Bala Beast in Saudi, First Lego League, one of our adored events over here in Dublin. Then following on from the site safety, you often end up in patient safety roles. So that's looking after the movement of crowds, feeding into the event controllers and the key staff in there. And so again, those type of events would be Soundstorm, Bala Beast, Wild Lights in the Zoo, and Dublin Pride. And I guess the key thing again across all those events and all those roles is there's always going to be an element of documentation that needs writing, reviewing, updating, chiming in on. So I would regularly do documentation for ourselves and Safe Events. That might be safety statements, risk assessments, method statements, that kind of thing. We would do it for event clients, so we'd write event safety management plans, construction phase plans, all the various appendices that are required to run an event. We would also do updates to our contractor partners documents. So anyone we work with out there, a lot of them have reached out in the past for updates to their documents that they might be submitting to us or to other safety teams, and we can provide updates for those. So that's pretty much where I'm at the moment. So we'll kick off by having a quick look at the type of events and projects that we might write documentation for and we might cover. We'll have a look at the benefits and challenges of such documentation in these various type of venues, and we'll push on from there. So the first type of kind of area or type of event we would tend to work on is in purpose-built venues. So two of those would be first Lego League in the Crown Plaza, excuse me, and the Dublin Tech Summit in the RDS. So these would be purpose-built event venues. They'd be used day in, day again for different types of events, and we would come in and assist with documentation and health and safety across those types of events. So the benefits about doing documentation in purpose-built venues is that there's often certain things are set, it doesn't tend to change, which can help us push on with the documentation. So that might be like the capacities for the venues would tend to be set. They might vary a little bit depending on what you're putting in there, but at least you have a baseline figure you can work off. The maps or floor plans would often already be created, so we can tie those into our plans, and it makes writing the documentation a lot easier. And the existing plans and procedures that are already in place for the venue would often help with our event-specific documentation as well. And with that comes certain challenges, depending on what type of venue you're working in or what normally happens in that venue or what's happening next. There might be certain systems you have to follow or procedures, or they might have set systems you use for accident and incident reporting. So you might have to fall in line with that type of thing, and it mightn't necessarily suit the documentation or systems that we're putting in place. And again, with venues like this, there's often kind of strict document approval and document control areas that you have to put your systems and documents through. So that can often just be time consuming and it can be a bit of a pain and a challenge, but it's nothing you can't get through. The next type of event or project that we would tend to work on are greenfield sites. And I say that because particularly the last four of those, I wouldn't describe as a greenfield in the slightest, but what I mean by that is there's no building on them, or at least when we start, it's an empty field, it's an empty site, it hasn't been built on. Over time, potentially permanent structures and buildings get put in, but these are ones basically where you go in, there's nothing there, you get the event up and running. So examples of that would be for us Wild Roots here in Sligo, and the DCC Halloween events we run, Soundstorm in Banban just outside Riyadh in Saudi, and the Formula One after race concerts in Jeddah, the Formula E after race concerts in Riyadh, and Noor Riyadh, which is an art project we worked on. So the benefits of doing documentation for these type of events, greenfield ones, is that it's often a blank canvas. You might be going in for the first time, it's an empty field. It might be our first time working with the client, it might be the client's first time running the event. So often you can use the fact that it's a blank canvas to work alongside them and create documents and systems that work for that given event. And it's like you tie in with site management on the site plans and capacities and your emergency procedures, and you just tend to have more swing on events like that in terms of writing your plans, because you can tie in with the creative types. That then allows the event control team to operate in unison and together. So again, if we've written plans for a particular greenfield site, the benefit for that is that if there's a night team or a different team come in to manage it, they can pick up kind of where the last team's left off. And of course, if you've written the plans and you know the plans back to front, it helps with inspections. So a lot of us will know with greenfield sites, you might get inspections from the HSA, the HSE, more recently the PSA and Private Security Authority. And having these documents in place, the benefit of knowing that you've written them and knowing that they're up to scratch is you know exactly the information to share, you know where to find it, and you just leave yourself in a much stronger position for your event and your client. The challenges, of course, of having a greenfield site and the documentation attached to that is the document control can often be a nightmare. So there might be security bodies, there might be the client themselves, local authorities. There's a lot of people who are going to want to chime in on this documentation, and they're going to want to have their own say. So trying to get the document control in order is essential. So we would always try and manage that internally ourselves. So we submit out initial versions of the documentation and let people feedback in, and we'd update accordingly. That can obviously be time consuming, but again, the benefits of this type of documentation and writing it yourself way exceed the challenges. Other challenges can be that in a greenfield site, if bad weather strikes, if stock is low, the site's going to change last minute, and that's going to result in changes to your emergency plans, your emergency procedures, your fire plans, your risk assessments, etc. So there can be challenges on greenfield sites, and there's no doubt about it. The next and kind of most interesting, and again, with the most benefits and most challenges, has been the kind of unique location events that we tend to work on. So some examples of those would be Dublin Pride. That's the Pride event in Dublin City, kind of shuts down half the city for half the day. It's broken into assembly, the route, and the gathering. So the assembly is where up to 15,000 participants will assemble on the north side of the city. So we kind of have to manage that separately and have separate documentation for over there. Then the route is about 2 kilometers long. You'll often have to think about the different risks and procedures and stuff to run that correctly, and then that finishes with a gathering. So it's quite a unique event in terms of it's long, it takes up a lot of space, and it just requires an awful lot of documentation. Next up from that is Wildlights in Dublin Zoo. So this is a lantern show that we run in an operational zoo at night time when there's way reduced zoo staff there. So you can imagine there's lots of risk there with live animals, live ammunitions, animal welfare, human welfare. It's dark, it's a zoo, so there's a ton of SOPs and different plans that go in place to make an event like that happen. Ballad Beast, you can see down the bottom left there, was a dance music and hip hop show in Old Town Jeddah. Fantastic show. Again, comes with a lot of different documentation that's required to please the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Defence, the various inspecting bodies. The client, of course, was the number one. And all of these documents are being written in order to keep the public safe, really. And the last one there is Azimuth, which happened in Alula in Saudi as well. Again, another fantastic site, UNESCO World Heritage Site. So there is a committee out there that look after security, safety, environmental sustainability. So we tied in with them an awful lot to make sure that the documentation was up to spec and that the event was going to be run in a safe and responsible way. Again, there's benefits and challenges to having documentation on these type of events. The benefits really is having confidence in your plan. With something like Pride, where you're taking up the city for half a day, you need to know that these plans are going to work. You need to know that your emergency plans have been thought out, that they've been tested if possible, that you've got your risk assessments in place, and that everyone just knows their roles and responsibilities. And having these documents is a huge part in making sure that you can stand by and know that you've done your duty of care there to the people and the staff. It's also a benefit because you can have all staff aligned, so you can talk to your different site management, security, safety, fire safety, the different people, medics, and make sure that all the plans are feeding into the one, and that event control can successfully run the event based on that. Again, it's not without its challenges running events like these and doing documentation for events like these. It's extremely intricate and tricky. There can be local authority requirements. They may or may not allow certain things to happen at certain venues. The document control, again, is crazy difficult because there's so many people feeding in. So you just need to make sure that when you're doing the documentation, that the document control is rock solid and you're kind of issuing updates to the various bodies. And each of these different types of venues are going to present different hazards and different risks. So taking Azimuth, for example, we dealt closely with the committee out there who would have an insight into the safety and security in the site that we would have had no idea about. Things like rockfall hazards as a result of the fantastic cliff face out there, certain light pollution and sustainability requirements they had. In Ballad Beast, there was a load of structural assessments that had to be done in the buildings. Again, the zoo is a live zoo, so none of these things are without challenges, but it's all about the benefits that these documents can provide in successful events. Just take a drink of water. So the next thing up then is client and international or internal health and safety documentation. So this is stuff to cover your own company, to cover our company, that we can submit if we're applying for work, or that a client can submit if they're applying for work. So examples of this type of documentation is safety statements, health and safety policies in the UK and across the globe, risk assessments and method statements, your health and safety inductions, or your on-site briefings, or your toolbox talks, the various inspection and reporting systems that you might have in place, your pre or post event checklists. And again, this is just the start of it all. You can really go down a rabbit hole here, but again, there's challenges with going down this. So there's different jurisdictions. So again, as I mentioned there, we would call a safety statement what the UK might call a health and safety policy. So if you're working in different jurisdictions, there's challenges in making sure that your documentation is up to spec. So you need to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes there. Again, it can be very time consuming to do this. But again, the benefits are that you're kind of obliging your legal, moral, and financial responsibilities. That you're ready for your new work, and again, that if you have any inspections or anyone comes knocking, that you know you can stand by your documentation and stand up to it. So we'll have a quick look at some different types of safety documentation that we would tend to write or update for events. So this is kind of what I would deem our core package that we would try and roll out across all events if required. So we do a construction phase plan. In Ireland, that's kind of, if it's over 28 days, it's a proper construction project. So we'd make sure to have construction phase plans. Abroad, we would just do this if it's a long project or there's civils happening. We'd make sure that that's kind of the first document that goes out that details exactly how you're gonna perform your construction. Next up is your health and safety induction, a key piece of documentation that kind of has to occur, in our opinion, for every event, so that anyone coming on site knows their responsibilities on site and what to do if they need help, or what to do if they need safety. The next key document then is an event safety management plan, or an event management plan, we call them over here in Ireland. So this just details everything start to finish about how you're going to run the event, who's going to run the event, your emergency plans, your procedures, your policies, your key contact list. It's an essential document that in Ireland you would need to supply in order to get a license for a large scale event. So this is a key one. Risk assessments is another one. Has to be done for events. Has to be done for if you're coming to work at an event, you'll have to supply this to a company like us. We'll have to assess whether we think you've assessed the risks correctly. And again, we can help anyone with this if they're working on our event or alongside us. Emergency plans and procedures, of course, are key. Fire safety management plans and fire risk assessments. We'd include them with the event safety management plans. These are how you're going to run the event if there's an emergency, and at what point you hand over if you need to hand over, and what resources you tap into. Your adverse weather management plan, of course, is about all things weather, and your show stop procedure to stop the show if you need to. Again, there's benefits and challenges to all of these. The benefits are essentially that it's going to provide you with event readiness. If you have time, you can test these plans, and you can repeat and standardize them as you go and go again. The challenges are, a lot of these are going to require input from different stakeholders and different bodies that are going to be working at your event. It's not always so easy to gather that information from those stakeholders. And things like your adverse weather management plan, that's going to require a lot of detail about wind management from your contractors that are providing marquees, stages, all that kind of stuff. And if they're not supplying those documents to you in the first place, or they don't know, it can be quite hard to develop these plans to the best of their ability. So alignment departments is definitely a hard one. Local authorities and stakeholders, they're always going to have input they want into each of these plans, and depending on what jurisdiction you're in, you're going to find it difficult to meet those requirements, or at least satisfy them the first time around. That's why we would always have kind of repeat updates as we go through these documentations. And different stakeholders and authorities are going to have different agendas. They're going to want to see different things in here. So particularly with the construction phase plan at the Azimuth event I mentioned previously, we had a lot of back and forth with the committee that managed out there, and it was brilliant. It helped us understand the site better. It showed them that we were showing a duty of care and being due diligent and meeting everything that they required. So it does work, but it's not without challenges. Supporting that kind of key area documentation that I mentioned previously is kind of the supporting documentation, your capacity calculations, your horizontal progressive in evacuation plans, your stay puts, your in evacuations. That's all about kind of where you can send people in your site, have your room for them on your site. It's essential documentation to back up your event safety management plans and emergency plans. You'd also look at your work permits and sign-offs, different types of reports, that could be your accident, incident, near-miss reporting, daily reports, post-event reports, non-compliance reports. And then a key one for us is the contractor and, of course, the food vendor health and safety documentation. So we're lucky that we've got a great team, digital ops team and graphics design team that have built like a smart sheet system for us. So everything is super centralized and easy. But this is just such a key part of running an event and ensuring that you've got the necessary documentation, because if you do get the inspection from the HSE or the HSA, they're going to want to see all of this and see that you've gathered it all in and tested it and checked it. So having it in is truly essential. Again, it's not without its challenges. Little changes will result in massive impacts here. So if if a brand design pop-up goes in front of an emergency exit, you're going to have to rerun all of your calculations, all of your stay-put procedures. That'll all feed into your other plans. It requires complex systems, as I mentioned, such as the one we use, Smartsheet. There's a lot of work that goes into getting something like that up and running, but once it's up and running, the benefits are amazing. But again, as I mentioned, the benefits are well worth it. It's your legal, your moral, and your financial. You have to be able to stand by your plans. You need them to support you for the event and make it all work together. It offers you a paper trail when you have all this documentation together, so you know that you've run the event as per your plans. Everything went well, or if something goes wrong, you can at least stand by your plan and say, well, that was exactly how we were to run it, and it went to plan or it didn't go to plan. So a little recap then. So challenges, I guess we're saying it's time consuming. There's no doubt about it. It is going to take time to do all of this, but it is worth it. And there are companies like ourselves out there that can assist. Licensing authorities and local authorities are going to have certain requirements they're going to expect to see in your documentation, such as in Azimuth, such as in Beast. Just link in with those people, find out what it is that they require, and work closely with them. It's going to make your event a smoother and more successful one. It's going to make the documentation stand up. And the learnings you make from that, from tying in with those departments, are going to feed into all your future documentation after that. There's going to be existing systems, policies, and procedures that you're going to have to kind of fall in line with. That could be reporting procedures, incident reporting procedures. You might choose to do an internal one yourself, or the venue you're working in might choose that you have to kind of conform to their one. Document control is always going to be hard. I would recommend having one primary author. That person issues the document, and all feedback comes back to that person, and they update accordingly. And depending on what site you're on, there's going to be unique hazard and risks. So there's going to be site-specific issues, such as the rock fall at Alula for the Azimuth gig. There might be poor communications issues. You're always going to face different things, and you need to have your documentation in order, risk assessments and various bits and bobs in order to kind of satisfy that you've thought of those different issues. There will be different stakeholder demands, and people are going to want to see certain things represented in plans. Other stakeholders are not going to want to be referenced in plans at all. You'll have to juggle that. And there's going to be environmental and sustainability requirements depending on what your site is. We're obviously moving much more towards those things and working closely with partners now to ensure that we're satisfying those needs as best we can. But it's a bigger player as we move on. But the benefits, again, is it's going to help you with your moral, legal, and financial obligations to safety, and that they're the reasons we do it. That's the reason everyone has to do it for their events. It's the reason we have to do it. It shows a duty of care. It shows that you've put your plans in place. You've tested them. You know what you're doing. It shows a paper trail. So if something ever, God forbid, does go wrong, you can at least stand by your plans and say, well, we thought about it and it worked, or it didn't work, and you learn from there. It allows you to run the project in the planned way. So in a Greenfield festival, say, if there's a night team and a day team, it allows for easy handover, having documentation and systems in place so that the handover is as smooth as possible. It supports with and facilitates inspections. So if you have your inspections from governing bodies, at least you've got the documentation to support what you're saying and supporting your plans, and you can show that you've thought about everything. It allows stakeholders to understand their roles and responsibilities. So we would always make sure to circulate our event management plans in Ireland and our safety management plans across the globe with all the departments, the medical, the security, the crowd managers, the site, the production, everyone, so that everyone understands exactly where they stand when we chime in. And then lastly, it helps you furnish your control room with all the relevant plans. There's nothing better than a good control room that has everything you need right where you need it. So having the documentation written means it's just a click away. You print it, it's on the walls, and you know exactly where to refer to when you do need it. So this is a bit ironic, I guess. My point here is really to say it's not just a checkbox. Like, there's so much more to it than that. It's going to help your event, and don't think of it as something you just have to do. This is going to help you in the long run. It's going to help with your moral, legal, and financial. As I keep repeating, it's so key to make sure you're hitting that. It shows that you put your duty of care in for your staff, for your public, for anyone involved, any stakeholder. And again, it allows you to just be confident about your plan and confident about your event. So if that sounds like something we can help with, and you need a bit of help with, please do feel free to get in touch. That's exactly what we do. It's exactly what I do. So yeah, that's kind of all I have for you. Thank you for listening. I hope you've all got a little bit of use out of that. And if there's any questions, do feel free to ask now or pop me an email. Thanks.
Conor, thanks so much. That was really, really good. We had quite a few people chatting away here, so definitely seems like people got some benefit out of it. If anyone does have any questions that they want to pop into the chat, go ahead and start popping them in now. Connor, can you see this chat box here, or do you want me to read them out to you?
Yep, I think I can see it there, all right. Yeah.
I'll just say as well, just we do have a few people here with where English isn't their first language, so maybe try and just answer a bit slowly on these.
Yep. Apologies about that. I'm sure I have a capability of running away with myself. Yeah, I see Mark saying there the defendable position, and again Dan up there. It's all about that. It's about just as many levels of building that defendable position and showing your moral, legal, financial reasoning. That's what it's all about.
Did you find, Connor, like obviously I'm sure each different event has its own set of challenges, but did you find in particular with like UNESCO sites that they would have extra challenges, or is it just that every event itself has its own different set of unique challenges?
Yeah, I mean, every event is going to provide different challenges. That's it's always going to happen. But yeah, with particular focus on those UNESCO sites, the Balabis one in Old Town, Ul Balad in Jeddah, and the Azimuth one in Alula, they just provided so many different ones, things you wouldn't think of, because at the end of the day, it's a beautiful World Heritage site, and you need to ensure that you're respecting it. So yeah, particularly across those, we had lots of environmental considerations and different hazards like the rockfall and a Lullo we never knew about. But again, it's just about reaching out to these local authorities and bodies to find out what they recommend and how you can work those into your plans.
Fair, fair, that makes sense. I see Abdullah Man. Yes, you can ask a question, just type it away in here, and Connor will be able to answer for you. In the meantime, if anyone else has a question, go ahead. Connor's dying for some here. And I see we have Mark wanting to join, so we might have him pop into the chat now as well.
Cool. Again, I guess if anyone has questions that come to mind after this, do feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn or via email. My email is just my first name dot second name, so it's Conor.Ó'Cléirigh at safeevents.ie. So if there's any questions or anything like that, do feel free to reach out.
We have one here. If you click into the Q&A only part of the chat there, Connor, we have a question there from Shaquille.
Cool.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry, I'm dealing with some tech gremlins, so I'm looking at one screen because this one over here doesn't work, but that's where the camera is, so forgive me.
Shaquille, yeah, I see that question there. So yeah, traditionally we would use the construction phase plan mostly for the construction of the event. There's still going to be things in there about your emergency requirements and fire safety and such, but it's mostly for the build of your event, and then your event management plan or your event safety management plan would be for the operational aspects. I see one from Alex there about kind of post-event documentation. So what we would do there is like post-event reports. So one we've just finished working on from Dublin Pride is non-compliance reports. So we would kind of request, collate, review health and safety documentation from our contractors, make sure that their plans are going to keep themselves safe, keep us safe, keep everyone else safe. So at the end of the gig, we would do non-compliance reports if there's contractors that have failed to submit the necessary documentation. And then we'd always get debriefs off our own staff and key stakeholders, just so we can always make sure the event is as safe and successful as it can be the following year.
We have a couple there in the other chat section there, Connor. There's a few here from Vilius, Ray, and Heather have questions in there for you.
Cool. Yeah, I guess the one from Villiers there about starting NEBOSH, that's kind of the route I took as well. So I did an event course in college, bachelor's, and then from there I went and furthered that by doing an international general certificate in NEBOSH. Gives you a great understanding for occupational hazards, and it's definitely a good place to start. From there, I've pushed on and done Mark's course here in kind of crowd safety and risks for large events, and I'm doing my Keith Still level 5 at the moment. So there's a lot of great courses out there that give you different backgrounds on different things, and I think the key is to try and know a little bit about everything to build your defendable position.
Yeah, I think, God bless you, if you ever do that professional diploma that we run, you'll hear the phrase defendable position from minute one to the last week, I think. But it's just a good way of framing it in your mind, because it's what we're trying to achieve all the time. Conor's right. Operationally, having all that documentation in event control helps you run the event safely. But we have found over the years that the thing that brings it into focus most for people, and not all people, but most, the thing that works across most types of people, is if you think of that defendable position, being able to back up your decisions, being able to back up your planning and demonstrate what you've done. And I think we all fall into that, especially like in a team here where we work, and you all have teams you probably work with. You get really comfortable, you have a really quick conversation, you make a decision, you move on, you plan the gig. But where's the documentation? Where's the record of that decision? Where can you show that you thought about X and Y? And that's always the trick. The documentation helps you map all that out. And minutes from meetings, all that type of documentation is even valuable, because you want to be able to show that you thought of something. We had it years and years ago with an event management plan for a show in Ireland, where we kept the gas section in, even though we were operating in a place that wasn't allowing any gas. And that fire officer asked us to take it out. And we refused at the time, because we wanted to be able to demonstrate it was considered and discounted, because we're not allowed to use gas. We don't just take it out, because then if anything happens and after the fact some barrister is rooting through it, they'll see no mention of gas and they'll try and come at us with, you never even thought about gas. So a lot of it is about just that record of what you thought about, what decisions were made, who was involved in making the decisions. So even if it goes wrong, you can show that you considered it. Here was the decision made. People can always challenge it, but you have a record of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. That's the key, all right. And then keeping it and knowing where to look for it whenever you do need it down the line. Ray, just reading your one there. Yeah, we would build that same mindset in terms of sharing the safety plans and event management plans with all parties involved, because as you say, it does improve communication. If there's time, we'd always try and test those plans. So on some of our longer run shows, such as Wild Lights, we would try and test kind of the various emergency procedures and plans within, so that everyone kind of does feel like they're involved and that they've contributed. So I would agree with that. And then
follow on that as well, that like we have found, again, you'll have stakeholders and stakeholders that will ask for just their piece of the plan, which is a thing we've run into before as well. For instance, you might have the medical authority wanting just the medical piece, or the fire officer wanting just the fire piece, which again is a conversation we've had repeatedly over the years, where we say, no, like if you only read that, that's your decision. That's cool. That's fine. But like it's in context for the whole plan. And we've had challenges where people only read their piece in isolation. Best case scenario, they waste time in meetings asking stupid questions that are answered in the rest of the plan. But worst case scenario, they don't have the full context of the event. They don't know why X has been decided medically, but if they read the full plan, they would. So, you don't want to be arrogant about it. You don't want to be obstructive, but you want to be comfortable with the way you do your business, you do your documentation, and then you want to feed that forward in a way that, suits you, that your company's comfortable with, that your insurance will stand behind, all of those things. Because someone had asked about, I think Brenda had asked, is there a set format for documentation that local authorities like or whatever? Like, there's no absolute set format. I think each company tends to land on what works for them and gets a license granted and they get comfortable with. Honestly, they're all fairly similar in approach. They're never wildly different. We've never seen someone else's planning on, wow, that is wildly different to ours. So you can present things differently. We always do think there are sensible ways to present the plans. and approach them and break them into sections in certain ways and stuff like that. But we've never had an authority say, here's the format, you have to feed it back in this format. I mean, they shouldn't really, because it should be on the experts on this side to feed it to them in the right way. And then Conor's right, you tailor it in certain ways. They'll have certain regulations. They might have an element of formatting they might want you to follow to make it easy. You take all that into account. But if we just set out to start a documentation suite for a show, we have our own way of doing it, same as every other company. We have a way we're comfortable with. And importantly, a way that we've told our insurance people we do it. And if we're to stray too far from that, we'd have to have a conversation with them to make sure they're still going to cover us if anything goes wrong.
Yeah, and I guess kind of in creating documentation and systems and the way we do things, I mean, it's always important to see how other people are doing things as well. And often, say, event licenses in your local area might be up on your local council or constituency website, so you can have a look at how they're writing things and talk to your local authorities and licensing agencies and see how they want things done. But I guess the key is to read and see how you can always be improving your own plans and documentation.
I mean, if we're going to be very honest, if you take the likes of the UNESCO sites, Conor, the way we really had to approach them was start from what do they definitely want, what do they expect, and then see what way we could bring that round to the way we like to present stuff. Because when you go somewhere like that really has a lot of different hoops to jump through, you definitely do bend a lot more, and you're better off doing that at the start and go, look, give me what you have. What do you need? What regs do you need us to follow? What do you need us to consider? Because that can guide how you feed them back to documentation. And again, from a business and a practical perspective, if it's your first time with that authority, you're probably going to bend to them a little bit more and make sure you're ticking those boxes. But I mean, ultimately, you bring them all into your format, the way you design stuff, the way you present stuff. They see their stuff within that. And again, in these instances, it gets to where you want to be. They give you the permission to run the events, and the events are great. And then you have a model that has proven to work there. So when we go back to Azimuth again in September, or Ballad again next January, things can change. It could be a new person wants a new thing. But in general, we've proven a model of documentation that they will sign off on. So
yeah,
you're starting from a good place.
Heather, I see your question there about kind of his documentation more last minute since pre-COVID. I guess we see it from different angles. We see it from all the angles. We see contractors sending us documentation, us writing documentation for events. So it's hard to answer that one. But what I would say is, yeah, there definitely seems to be a last minute element that's, I guess, has always been there and is still there post-COVID. That it can be hard to get your contractors to send in health and safety documentation. And what we find the clearest and easiest way to do that is to, if this is what we're talking about, the same thing, Heather, is to target those contractors and target those people for exactly what you're looking for. If you leave it too open and vague, we find it can be very hard to get submissions and get documentation in, and it's always last minute. Whereas if you spell it out for people, exactly what you're looking for, we tend to see it come in a lot quicker. Abdul Rahman, I see, asking about how to be a safety advisor. I guess I can only speak from my own personal experience, and that was, I kind of did a few courses in it and took some assistant jobs and lower level jobs and volunteered in this area and met some people, and from there you kind of just pick it up and meet the right people and opportunities kind of come your way. But I guess competence is a mixture of experience and training, so you kind of need to be working away on both of those.
I think, Abdul Rahman, just to speak to that as well, we do plan on running another NEBOSH course in person in Saudi later in the year. So that might suit you. Otherwise, we're going to run another online one as well. The NEBOSH is a great starting point because it's occupational health and safety. It's a great grounding. And then you can develop on the event side then. So there's obviously our diploma. There are master's courses and things you can do. But the NEBOSH is a great starting point because it builds that occupational site safety side of your training, and then it's experience, it's exposure to risks on site that get you to learn the event stuff. So I think they might, you say you're looking for a course, they might be of interest. Again, there are others you can do online. You could look at the level 5 crowd safety that Andy and the guys in the Square Meter group do. That could be one you could be doing online in the meantime. Maybe there's some good ones out there. Realistically, especially out in the Middle East, it's about getting your foot in the door and getting on a site. I mean, we have trainees that have worked with us in Saudi since kind of day one. that have come up through the ranks and work on lots of shows with us. And that's easier said than done, because I mean, you should see how many people apply for the jobs we have out there. And we can't keep everyone happy. We can't give everyone some work, but we're not the only company out there either. So there are opportunities. But Conor's right. Try and get experience as well as waiting for courses and getting courses done, and you're in a much stronger position then, I think.
100%. Rick is asking there about kind of our most inspections standardized in the US. It's different. No, over here it totally depends on what jurisdiction and what governing body and what authority is inspecting you. We often won't know about it until it arrives on site, and we often won't know what their agenda is until they've asked 100 questions already, kind of a thing. So no, I can't say from my experience that there's an awful lot of standardization when it comes to inspections on sites. Just pop back into the Q&A.
Yeah, we have a couple more on the other side there.
Dan's got a good question there about how do you make sure the relevant stakeholders read and sign off on relevant documents. I think if you take both of them separately, if you look at reading, very hard to do, let's be honest. We send, Conor's nodding there, we send plans around, and if you put a gun to my head and made me guess how many people read them, a lot of times it's a low number. What I can do is tell you exactly who did read them. There are really good people we work with in those agencies that we know read them. Plenty more do not. Signing off, I think, is a different thing, Dan, completely. Ultimately, if we take running a gig in Dublin as an example, the only sign off as such we need is the granting of the license from the council. Now, they'll take input from the health service, from the fire departments, all those at meetings and all of that. So if they have major problems, they will be flagged by the time you're granted or not granted a license. But as a sign-off thing, none of them will ever use the phrase. None of them will sign off on your plan. They'll give you advice. They'll say, we think it might work. The license really is the thing that's a sign-off as such. And they're signing off based on what you said you'd do in your plans. So if you deviate from that, someone has asked a question about deviating from it, or something happens during the show, how do you update a plan? Like, it mightn't be that you update the plan, but I've learned the hard way. What you definitely need to do is record the thing happened, the decision you made, what fed into that decision. That could be, talking into your phone and recording it. It might be you have time to write that down, get everyone to sign a page. You have to record it somehow, because things will happen on shows. You'll have to make decisions that weren't in the plan. They're hopefully made for the right reasons. They're for safety reasons or operational reasons. You have to have them recorded. And when I say I learned that the hard way, I learned it the hard way. So, one thing we always say in here, it comes up on the diploma course a lot as well, is you have to empower your staff on the ground to deviate from the plan. Like, a plan built over a year in offices and meetings is one thing. It can change wildly for good reasons on the ground. So your people have to be empowered, but you have to have a way of tracking changes, tracking decisions, whether it's through event control on recorded comms, or it's Conor's out on the street seeing something he has to adapt to, puts a voice note in his phone. Get it recorded somehow. Any version of recording your thought process is better than what most of us do, which is zero version.
Yeah, it's interesting you raised that, because I saw Chirag actually ask a question much the same about how do you adapt to things on the fly that might pop up. And I guess that's the key, is just making sure that it's logged with the event control that are on the job, or that you've logged it and timestamped it somewhere, and then ensuring that the controlling body, whether it's the event controller or the control room, know that deviation has happened and we're now operating a different way, but just making sure that it's noted when that happened and why that happened. Is how we would deal with that on the fly.
Dan's got a good follow-up point there as well. I mean, the reality is, Dan, to speak to what you've kind of said, don't get me wrong, we send around a plan for, say it's Dublin Pride or Wildlights or whatever. It's followed up by phone calls and chats with the right people to make sure they've seen key things. That's reality. It's the world we live in. We know when we do a plan if certain things might be contentious or we need people on board before the meeting or whatever. So when we send a plan for a big show, we'll kind of know the personalities, we'll know who will read it, we'll know who we should give a heads up to on a call, we'll know who to follow up with to cover our own asses and say, look, have you seen that? We're doing that differently this year. It's not the way we did it last year. I want to make sure you've spotted that. We have to do all of that. I think a lot of us do have to do that to make sure the key points have gotten across. from a practical perspective, I always say this, and we've only ever done this once, but it works really well, and maybe we should try it again. We did a plan for a parade event years ago, and in an effort to make sure that more people understood the plan, we created a video, which sounds fancier than it was, because what it essentially was the main elements of the document put into a PowerPoint and then exported as a video out of PowerPoint. So it showed the route, it showed the assembly area, it showed where we thought risks would be, where we thought crowds would gather. If I remember correctly, it was like a 4 to 5 minute video that at the statutory meeting, everyone got to watch, and worked really well for that event. Everyone had a greater understanding of various things. Things like that are worth doing, because I do think ultimately it's going to come back to us. It's on us as the safety people or the organisers to do everything we reasonably can to make sure that that understanding is within those stakeholders. We can't rely on them all reading it and understanding the whole plan, let's be honest. So things like videos or those phone calls or side meetings, there's millions of ways. People take in information differently, they respond differently. There's loads of things. I guess what I'm saying is you don't just write the plans and send them an email and done. It takes more than that usually.
Yeah, 100%. I like that idea about the videos. Yeah, we might have to look back into picking that up again.
You see Chrissy nodding her head going, fine. It worked really well, and genuinely easy to do. We didn't have a graphic design department at the time. We did this internally. It was the maps we had done for the gig anyway. It didn't take any genius level of kind of graphics that we have here now, but it works really well. It got the understanding across. I do think it's suited to certain types of events more than others. So if you think of a parade event with a route and a start and a finish time, and you can do the risk mapping, you can put the risk mapping on it so people understand that's where we think the crowd will be. We know from last year they'll all come to this corner. That gets across really, really quickly then. But it was literally just slides in PowerPoint, and when you're finished the PowerPoint, you can export it as a video, and you hit play and you play it as a video. So it's not rocket science, but it can be quite effective. And yes, you should definitely adopt that approach again sometime and see does it work as well.
It's reminded me a little bit, I guess, about how we did Pride this year with the show day briefing. So kind of we took it for certainty that not every steward and security guard and medic is going to read the event management plan and know their particular area of responsibility. So we shortened it into assembly, route, gathering, and then your key points for kind of day staff, show day staff, that kind of thing, where your nearest emergency exit is, assembly points. So kind of cutting and chopping the key parts that kind of are relevant to the various different bodies associated with your event is definitely something we've been working on regularly as well. I see a question there from Ian about tailoring documentation for local law. How do we do it? How long does it take? Yeah, it takes a long time. You need to search everywhere and anywhere to try and find whatever the equivalent is locally. And if there isn't, then we would tend to resort back to the closest English or Irish or American or kind of standardized version of that. So yeah, it takes time. It takes input from lots of people who've worked out there before. A lot of the safety advisors that we would have out in the ground out there would chime in on stuff like that. And yeah, it just takes a lot of people chiming in to get everything up to spec over there.
But again, that's an ongoing process too, Ian. Like even just today, and this is just coincidence, I'm not filling you full of shit here, but we had a call with our digital ops team a couple of hours ago where we have a review happening at the minute of all our documentation. Now, predominantly it's the documentation we use in the Middle East, but there's a suite of documentation. It's under review at the minute. We have key operational people reading them again, checking on them, going, that's all still perfect as is, sign off, graphics make it look however level of pretty we need it to look, and it's signed off again. So you don't do these once. They're living documents. You don't do them once and move on. You review them, you make sure they're fit for purpose. Now here's the thing. Shit hits the fan, something awful happens on one of our shows. Some barrister, expert, solicitor may prove that they weren't fit for purpose. And that can still happen. But what we can show is we give a shit, we try hard, we reviewed regularly, loads of sets of experienced eyes looked at this. Unfortunately, something still happened, but it shouldn't be because we didn't do what we should have done. We weren't neglecting our duties. our duty of care. That's what you're doing with your defendable position and just having good practices. And don't get me wrong, Chrissy and Conor will be honest and tell you, so will the rest of the team. We're in the height of it and we're so operational, busy rolling from show to show. They don't always get reviewed as regularly as they should. Like, it has to be part of the process. It has to be mandated every 6 months, every year. Someone has to lead that project to make sure it's done. It's just an important part of, steering the ship that we try to steer. It's us doing our best for our clients, not just writing a form or a document 4 years ago and still using it. If it's fit for purpose and it has been reviewed multiple times and we still believe it works as is, that's fine. But you want the record of it being reviewed. You want it signed off again internally. You want, as Conor says, we use a primary author and secondary author system. So, and I think I just spotted a question from someone about the version control. Conor made a really good point, which I would like to think he learned from us, but he may have learned elsewhere, is it should rest ultimately with one person. One person should be the primary author and be in charge of version control. We can all feed in. We might have meetings where we bounce around plans for the change we're going to make. But if Conor's the primary author, Conor makes the change, Conor reissues the plan. People internally and externally know it'll come from Conor. We'll always have at least one secondary author. Sometimes we have loads of eyes are on these things. But the system is primary, secondary. So as part of our document control, as part of trying to make sure we're operating the best practice, like Ian mentioned in the chat, that's a part of it. It's a small part, but it's a key step in that we have at least two sets of eyes. Heaven forbid Conor's having a bad day or just forgets about something or misses something like I've done before. You want the second set of eyes to catch it and go, oh, here, you remember the RPU asked for X. We haven't done it yet. And went, shit, forgot that. Yes, we need to get that in there. So minimum 2 eyes so you can manage the version control. And I forget who asked the version control question, forgive me. The other key bit that for version control that's really, really simple, but so many plans that we're asked to review still don't have them, is first page, not the cover page. Your very first content page inside should map out the version control. It should be one of the first things people see. What version are we on? Who signed it off? Where are we at? That should be front and center. So people quickly, they won't pay attention to the detail of it, but they'll see version control. These people are on it. They're on top of that. That's good to see. It sets you up in their brains as professionals very, very quickly. Even if they don't understand what's written in it or what the abbreviations are or whatever, they see that you're on top of version control. You have a system. Someone will have a different system, a better system. That's up for debate. You have a system. It gets employed. That's what you want to keep constant.
100%. Yeah, it was Sheila that asked that question. I was going to touch on that a little bit as well and say that, what we would do, and it's quite basic at the moment, and we're updating it and always trying to make it better, is it's just revision 1, this is what was here, revision 2, this was to detail what your changes are so that when somebody's reading that documentation, they can quickly scan and go, oh, nothing was changed that's relevant to me, or nothing significant was changed here. It was just key contacts. So we'd always kind of note it that way. And then depending on what project you're on, you mightn't be the owner of the document as such. So certainly with one of the projects we worked out in Riyadh, we were submitting them documentation. Ultimately, it had to fall into their systems and procedures and titling. So they were ultimately the owners and controllers of the document. So that adds a whole other kind of, you have to do document control internally, and then they have to do it on their side as well. So you need to kind of work with your client and work with the other stakeholders and ensure that there is kind of one centralized person updating, and then that it's being stored kind of correctly in line with that.
That's a really good point about that small level of detail in the document control. If you accept, and maybe you don't, but if you accept that it's really our responsibility to get this key information across to people. So we don't just fire the email and assume they read the plan. So if your goal actually is to get this information into the right people's brains, one of the best things you can do is when you do a new revision, as Conor says, have a box, have a little table, and you just outline the areas changes were made or whatever. And revision to revision, it could be 4, 6, 8, 10 changes. It's not loads of text, but you're pointing to sections. Section 4, firefighting equipment plan updated, whatever. Small little snippets like that, so someone can open it up and go, I've already seen a plan for this. What have they updated? As Conor says, no, none of this applies to me. Perfect. They don't have to go reading the plan to see is it the same as the last version. You're calling out on page 2 or 3 what has changed so they can decide whether they go read it or not. If you put something in there with the word fire in it, you're guaranteed then the fire officer here will have a look at it. So you're really spoon feeding as much as you can within reason, but that's a real easy one that helps them a lot, is just to call out the changes in each revision. Now, if you do a big event with multiple revisions, that could run on to 2 pages max at the start of a plan. But the amount of time it saves people, and where it parks you in their heads as being on their side, understanding their time is valuable, feeding them the key information early in the document, it works for you on a number of fronts, I think.
Yeah. I've lost the question there. It is from Joan. So one there about transport arrangements with local transport providers, railways, buses, whatever it is. Is that in our documentation? Short answer, yes. Like, we'd always reference whether it's, say, it's Pride, where you're shutting down half a city, that might affect rail, taxi, private bus, coach, public bus. We'd always ensure to reference that in our documents, but ultimately the gory details will be within the traffic management plan and within the actual provider's SOP themselves. We'd always reference that and ensure that that's very clear in our policy, so that any stakeholders and government agencies or bodies who are reading it kind of explicitly understand the impact that the event's going to have.
Keith Lasher has a question there. Hi, Keith. I'm genuinely not entirely sure I understand the question, Keith. As in, sorry, I'm reading it. It's in the chat. Safety checks. Like you got, yeah. So you guys, sorry, we would work with Keith a lot. He's one of the best kind of structural engineers in Ireland for temporary structures and events. So we work together a lot. But we review safety. Should that be in the event management plan and documentation? Like, for us, all of that should be in there. If you're asking about like safety checks on site broader than the structural stuff you'd be looking at, yeah, I mean, we would say there should be a format for it, whether it's a physical form, it's done online, wherever it's done, your pre-opening checks, all of that stuff should be formulaic, it should be systematic, it should be procedure driven, and it should live in the event management plan or the suite of event control documents or wherever is appropriate for it to live. But all of that stuff should be in the same way you would have forms and the way you would write a letter giving an opinion on a structure, the format would be similar all the time. Yeah, people planning the events and doing all the other safety elements should have similar formats, and it should live in that documentation as well. If that didn't answer your question, just pop in and clarify it for me and we can come back to it, but I think that's what you're asking.
Unless I've missed any, I think that's us caught up. If anyone, I guess, had any, do feel free to post it in again if we've missed it there.
Mohammed just come in. How do you manage or deal with incompetent contractor docs? Is it necessary to make the contractors correct during the event or issue a non-compliant post-event? Yeah, really good question, Mohammed. Being very honest, there are various ways we approach that. It depends where we are, what part of the world we're in, what level of documentation we expect from contractors. Like when we're on shows in the Middle East, we'll be dealing with contractors who might be brand new to the event industry, based locally or in region, as well as some of the best international contractors in the world. So if we have a local company making and producing and installing fencing, we'll work with them in one way. If we have Stageco, one of the biggest stage companies in the world, coming in to build our main stage, we'll work with them a different way. We'll expect different stuff from them. So the answer is, I mean, incompetent is a harsh word, but I know where you're coming from. The way we choose to do it, we get into the dirt with them. We get hands-on with them. From day one with our shows in the Middle East, we would have what we used to call a hot desk in our office, where contractors could come in and we'll work through the documentation with them. We'll show them what should be in a risk assessment, a method statement. A lot of them are keen to learn. They've just not been exposed to this stuff properly before, especially in Saudi or some other territories in the Middle East. So we're trying to bring everyone up. You know, the rising tide should lift all boats and all that. So the way we approach it, and I'm not saying it's right, and two, I'm not saying everyone does it this way. But what we choose to do is really work with contractors who might not be up to scratch or might appear incompetent. Because what we have found is, if you only went on their paperwork, they would actually appear incompetent. But sometimes when you work with them on site and see how they do their work, they're actually not that bad, but they don't know how to do the paperwork properly. And we've also had situations where the paperwork says one thing, the teams on the ground do a different thing. Both are grand, but they don't match. So both are fine, but they don't match up. So we help them get to that point. We have a famous example we use from Saudi all the time. We won't name the company, but in the first year we did a particular show out there, they were absolutely the worst for safety documentation, for how they operated on site, how they treated their staff. They were genuinely the worst. We can show you the non-compliance reports, but I won't. And year two, they were one of the best. Weren't perfect, but took everything we had done with them on board, pulled their stocks up, did loads of stuff in the intervening period, were significantly better. And we're almost the poster child for a level we'd love to reach with all the contractors out there. And for us, because we care about what we do, we're not perfect, but we care about helping people improve. That really mattered to us, that they went from the work we did with them in year one to a much better way of working. And we know from working on other shows and talking to other people in events out there that they carry those processes to other sites now. They don't just do it because we're there. That's how they now do their work, and it's way better than it used to be. And that matters to us because we want to see that progress and we want to help them improve. So I don't know what I called them incompetent from day one. They just didn't know what they didn't know, which may be actually the definition of incompetent. It just sounds harsh to me, but I think that is the answer. We'd like to work closely with them. And if people want to learn, we'll bring them on the journey, as Martin says in here. We'll do that 100%. We'll bring them along. We'll show them. We can provide templates. We can do consultancy separately. Conor's done work for us with some of the international contractors we work with out there who realize some of their stuff could be better probably, or should be reviewed externally. And we've done projects in the off season where Conor and others on our team would review their documentation with a view to the work they're expanding doing in the Middle East and help them improve and tailor for out there. So,
yeah, I'd 100% agree with all of that. And the idea of the hot desk is something that we've tried to implement on all events in STEM where possible. If there's time and space, let's have an extra desk where people can call up to us and we can help talk them through it. We did it recently in an event in Sligo where they had a large kind of green crafts and kind of entertainment area where a lot of them wouldn't have ever been asked or wouldn't know how to prepare these documents. So we spent time sitting down with them, and it is kind of spoon feeding them in essence, because it's just something that's so out of their world, but yet they can create these amazing concepts and designs, but they've just never had to do this before. So sitting down beside them and going, okay, well, would you think that maybe there could be a fire while you're doing this, or somebody could get hurt, manual handling, are you lifting, spoon feeding them, as Dan's saying there, coming up with kind of what should be in RAMs or health and safety policies. It's giving them examples often helps them kind of come to the realization themselves of the different risks that they face. But sometimes it is just about giving them a hand and reaching out rather than just issuing non-compliance straight away.
Yeah, and I would acknowledge, look, if you're here, you probably know a bit about us and how we do what we do. We probably go overboard a little bit on the helping, the spoon feeding, the producing infographics and templates for them and stuff like that. That's just part of how we like to operate our business. So I'm looking out the window here, as well as watching a football match. I can see one of our graphic designers currently working on an infographic, which we will give to food and beverage contractors on our Middle Eastern events to help them understand what we need from them, how we can help them get there, what courses are available that they could, all of that. We do overdo that, for want of a better phrase, but it's how we like to operate. We've done that from day one, and we like to share knowledge and all that stuff. But be out there, especially in the Middle East where the industry is a bit newer, genuinely most people we come across on the ground want to learn. They want to improve. It's all new, it's brilliant, they love it, and we want to be able to help them. So if we can send them some documentation, we create a portal, we send them there are templates for method statements, risk assessments to give them a starting point of what, as Conor says, what to think about. Some of the templates we offer are literally just a series of questions. But when they answer the questions, if you then take the question out, they've pretty much created a method statement. And if you can have them understand that that's how it's done, you're just, as Conor says, you're asking yourself, well, could there be a fire while we're doing this? What stuff are we using that could give rise to the fire or would be fuel for the fire? It's just ask questions. And sometimes then you can do an exercise where you literally delete all the questions and have them read back what they've written as answers. It's essentially a method statement about what they do. No, let's be honest. None of this documentation is rocket science. But if it's not something you're used to doing, or if you've never been asked before, or the industry's new, you've not worked in it, it's new to you. So we want to come up with as many ways as we can to help people get to where we'd like them to be. And honestly, we've gotten calls, we've gotten emails, we've gotten messages from either contractors or competitors on other shows saying, you know, we've just had documentation come in for a gig here in Jeddah, and it's got you guys essentially written all over it. I can tell you worked with them, and it's way better than what we've seen before. Like, that stuff matters to us. I get that not everyone works that way, but we quite like doing that. And we've invested in the Middle East, in particular in the region, in a million different ways. This is just one of the ways we invest out there, is trying to help these contractors up their game. And in year one, for a lot of our big shows out there, we weren't shy about it. We were essentially saying, if you're the first who does what you do to jump on this ship and get the documentation right, it's a competitive advantage, because the middle beasts of the world, the big clients of the world, want all these boxes ticked. So if you're one of the first ones ticking them and you do a good job on the ground as well, you know, you're ahead of the posse. So that rang true with a lot of them, and they've really allowed us to help them and work with them.
I haven't seen any further questions come in, so if there's anyone with any burning questions, I'd say do please ask, or reach out to us afterwards, of course.
My screen just changed when Chrissy disappeared, and I've lost what was in the chat or Q&A, so I'm not seeing them. So if anyone does have questions, just pop it in again, copy it in if you want, shout. I think it's 1-1 in the match, by the way, if anyone cares.
Oh, I was just about to say, I hope nobody tells Conor the score yet. Yeah, my thing just dropped there, but before it did drop off, I had been looking, and it seemed that we did answer all the questions so far. But as Mark said, if anyone has anything else, feel free to drop us a line. We can always get back to you that way.
They've all just reappeared for me now too. So
here we go, yeah.
How to calculate emergency exits as per number of people. Adnan, that's a whole different course, my friend. Can't give you an answer to that on an hour or an hour and a half long webinar. There are ways to do it. You need training. You need to know what you're doing. You need to be able to stand behind your figure. What I will say is what I always say. You could ask Conor, myself, and every safety officer we have working for us to calculate something like that. We could all give you different numbers. What's important is the methodology that got you there, your rationale for it, and your training to do it in the first place. That's important. We've actually done this as an exercise many times on courses, asked everyone to come up with a capacity calculation, and they can be, I won't say they're wildly different, but approaches can be different. You know, for instance, if Conor worked a show where there was a big fire and people got hurt or nearly got hurt, he'll probably be more cautious from a fire perspective. If I've worked shows where I thought we got away with something and didn't have enough exits, I might always err on the side of way more exits. So it's all subjective, but you have to be able to stand behind it, have a rationale for your numbers, be able to say, I've done these courses, I have this experience. That's the key. I mean, Conor will tell you, on some of our biggest shows, our teams on the ground who are doing the calculations do them differently or come up with different numbers, and we all have to meet internally first and go, what are we putting forward to the client? What works here? What makes sense? How have we gotten there? That is one of the most complicated ones to answer. But if anyone's talking for another few minutes, I'm going to grab a link for something that I'll pop into the chat.
We do also have a previous webinar that we did with data science for crowded events, which could be helpful for that. But as Mark says, it's going to be different for every event.
We did do, I should have this ready. Forgive me, I don't. I'll try and find it. We did an email course, a 5-day thing you can sign up for free that brings you through how to do capacity calculations. I haven't pushed it or kind of promoted it in a long time. So give me a couple of seconds and I'll see, can I grab that link for you?
Yeah, I guess the process is going to be the same. Deciding how you get to that process is going to differ even based on what region you're in, what type of event it is, where your event is based, previous experience. Like we can all make tools that mathematically calculate these things, but it's deciding your flow rates and your evac times and stuff obviously depend on the type of event and where it is. So it's complicated. You can read into it for hours and hours and hours and still come out none the wiser. So
I think I have found this. How do I share it?
Is it just a link, Mark?
It should be. It's actually, this will make sense to you, but probably no one else. It's a thing we built in ConvertKit. So you just sign up for it and then it sends you out an email a day for 5 days. I'm just, maybe if I get the preview. Delete. I mean, this tells you how long it is since I built this and sent it to anybody that I'm struggling to even. Oh, do you know what? I think I might have been smart ahead of time. Let me just check something. I bet you put it on the website at a short link. Oh, well, not if my fat fingers spell it wrong. It won't work with it. Sorry, someone asked a question, so this isn't me waffling.
I think we have actually answered all the questions that were in here for now. Abdulrahman is asking, when do you come to KSA? Mark, you're heading over in the autumn, aren't you?
Oh, this is really annoying. Oh, sorry. Well, we've projects already. So we've projects happening at the minute. When do I go over? Depends on when we run these courses. It's probably October, November, unless one of these newer projects causes me to have to go out earlier. But we will have a huge team out there ramping up from September, October, November we have a lot of shows to deliver in December and stuff. What's the lowest risk event you can do? Desi wants
one
to.
You don't. He knows the answer to that.
He does.
The only one with no risk is the one you don't do. There's always going to be hazards and risks associated to events. It's about how we mitigate those risks and plan for them.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons we talk about risk management rather than elimination most of the time, because you're always going to have risks. You're always just managing them. So, sorry, this is driving me. Oh, found it. It's an ugly link, but I can't find the prettier one. But this should work. I'm going to pop this in the chat. Someone just click on it. Don't sign up if you don't want to, but somebody click on this and tell me, does it work? And does it bring you to a landing page for a
yeah,
course?
It does.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So there you go. So I'm not saying that makes you an expert or anything at doing capacity calculations, but it's a 5-day. You'll get an email each day that will walk you through the steps and explain the approach we tend to take when we do it. We've had thousands of people do that, and lots of people said it was useful. So that might be helpful, Adnar, but there's a lot more to it to actually answer the question of how do you calculate it, if that makes sense. But that course will be useful, I think.
And I'd say there's probably a professional diploma coming up that might help a little bit further. Would there be?
Sorry, thank you, Conor. Yes, I'm a bad salesman. Yes, we are starting the next class group of the professional diploma the 21st of next month. For anyone familiar with it, I think Ian and a few others have done it on here. We usually do it. I'm going to grab the link for that too, because I'm such a bad businessman. We normally do it on Thursday nights for 13 weeks. We've changed it this time, basically to suit my kids. We've changed it to a Monday night. But anyway, everything's recorded each week, and we do spend some time on capacity calculations and other things. So let me just pop a link for that too, in case
I have that here, Mark.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. So if anyone's interested in that, Conor's right. We do go into it a bit more during that. There's a week kind of devoted to that kind of stuff. Again, I think some of the people here have done that course already. If you want to check, Graham says it's well worth doing. Graham always says nice things about the course. So, that's an option too. Honestly, there isn't currently a course you do that then just certifies you to say you can do capacity calculations. We've been asked loads of times to develop something. I kind of shy away from it because a bit like not wanting to give someone just the medical plan out of a big event management plan, I think capacity calculations need a broader understanding of an event and context and all of that, because you can't just give a one size fits all. So we kind of shied away from just doing a course that says, oh, you can now calculate stuff, because there's so much to it. And genuinely, I'm not lying when I say we put 10 of the best safety people I know for events in a room give us the same thing to figure out, we'll come up with different numbers. As Adnan says, 2 people per square meter, that's a starting point for a lot of us. There's so much context to that. So certain sections, if we take any outdoor gig, outdoor concert we've done in the last year in Saudi, for instance, certain parts of the site might be at 2 people per square meter. Others will be completely different for good reason. It's never as simple as just 2 people per square meter, unfortunately. Otherwise, no one would need any training or courses and this stuff. It'd be way simpler.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think that's covered everything. Unless there's any other questions, I think we'll probably head off now. Let's see, we're coming in here. Conor, do you have some pre-identified critical information requirements that you start with, or is each project unique at the start?
Good question. I guess we'd always kind of have a basis that we're gonna start our documentation with. It's not a template, it's not a sample, it's kind of a layout that we would always then kind of write the document from. So there's definitely particular information that we'd be looking for from clients, from other stakeholders, from local authorities, from the venue management. But ultimately, each event is unique. There's only so much kind of crossover you can do, even year on year. If you've got legacy or repeat clients, it's too easy to just change the year. It needs to be rewritten. It's a totally different event. There's different circumstances, different social things going on. So yeah, there's definitely critical info that we would require, and we'd follow that basis. But every event is different and requires rewritten documentation.
Yeah, Conor made a good point earlier, Rick. If you think about the contractor side of it, we try and spend some time as well learning from contractors what about what we do or the safety people do pisses them off, makes their lives tough, all of that. And often it's about just asking for like a broad swathe and range of stuff that we might not want. So as Conor says, we've built a team, I guess, where we've got the resources to get much more insular about each contractor and what we want from them, which is what we try and do. And so if we dig into it with them and go, right, here's what we need from you. Like if they mention we're going to be doing lifts, okay, we need a lift plan. We could just do what lots of companies do and fire a list of stuff with lift plan on it to everybody. Like that's going to drive other people mental because they won't be doing lifts. So we take that extra step. I think Canada just scored. We take that extra step to try and understand what they are doing on site, what their scope is. And for a lot of our projects in the Middle East in particular, the scoping part is something we get visibility of most of the time ahead of time. So we can decide and engage directly with Conor from Safe Events, who's going to come on site. We know what his scope is, so we know what we want from him. We're not just sending a massive list. If any of these apply to you, please send them. So we try and get a bit more concise with each of them so they know and they appreciate that it's about their work, what they're doing. And then from a broader perspective on documentation, obviously we have kind of a standard approach that we would use and things we know pretty much every gig needs. And then after that, I mean, Conor comes back to that example because it's a fresh enough one and a good one. Like there are very few events we've ever had to do rockfall analysis for. But we wouldn't have got that gig past the post if we didn't do that. That was critical because of where it is. And I didn't get to go there. Martin in here and a few others did. But having seen the photos and having seen the videos from the show, if you stood there and looked up, you'd understand very quickly why we had to do rockfall analysis. And similar, we've done gigs in old parts of Jeddah where a legitimate concern was the vibration we'd be putting through 5 or 6 stages, shaking buildings and knocking stuff over. So they're not testing and documentation we'd always have to create, but you couldn't do those gigs without them. You'd be remiss, you'd be negligent at that point if you went in there, started blasting the biggest dance DJs in the world around the place and never went, oh, we never thought things might fall down. So again, there's an approach, there's a framework, but every gig will always have something a bit strange. And as Conor says, even if it doesn't, even if it's a carbon copy of last year's gig, what you have to stop yourself doing is just carbon copying last year's paperwork and writing a new date on it. You review it at least. Don't get me wrong. We've done shows where from year to year, very little changed in the paperwork. But I can say, truthfully, 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, much closer to 10 times out of 10 these days, We've taken the time, we've read through it all, we've checked what needs change and what doesn't. The worst thing is to just fling the same documentation at it again. And I'm sure we've all done it to a degree at some stage, and we've had people do it to us. You can generally spot that stuff quite quickly.
100%. And even those kind of strange rockfall or building tests or vibration tests, they're going to change year on year as well. It's a crazy climate we're living in at the moment. We're seeing this stuff happening in Greece and flooding in Milan, and during our D-rig in Jeddah we had floods. So like the tests we did last year are not the same tests that we'll have to do this year. We'll have to retest everything, and it's key to just do that every time you've got the event.
And even just thinking about that, when I think back to last year, when we went from Soundstorm to Jeddah for that 5 or 6 days, we had to redo some of the vibration testing because things had changed within the few weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious at the minute we're readying to go into build a new venue that's essentially in an old cement factory. And the amount of testing from dust particulates and cement, all that kind of stuff. Again, it's not stuff we've ever done on a site before. But if you go into a cement factory, you're running into challenges you've never had on a different site. So you've probably all seen me and heard me say this too often. We enjoy the challenges. We're not the type of people who want to do the exact same thing every year. That sometimes wrecks our heads and leads to late nights and documentation hoops. But we'd rather that than just do easy peasy corporate or conference stuff. We like the challenging stuff, and we like learning how to get these events run in challenging spaces. As someone said to me in one of the UNESCO gigs, Simon said to me in Production Glue, he goes, "Do you have UNESCO sites in Ireland?" And I went, yeah. He says, "Would you ever be let near them to run a gig?" I went, "Sweet Jesus, no. We'd never find the right person who could give us the permission. And if you did, they'd never give you the permission." So this was a day we'd all jumped through so many hoops and life was tough and there wasn't so much work to get done. And his point was, look at the beautiful place we get to figure this out in, and we get the pleasure of trying to run a gig in. And we all knew we'd get it done. And we all knew we'd get the permission once we were all rowing the same direction. And sometimes we just had to remind ourselves, it's all worth it. Look where we're going to run a gig. We may never get this opportunity again. You couldn't do this at UNESCO sites in a lot of the Western world. So let's jump through the hoops. Let's show them how we can do it safely, and let's have a great gig. And that's the payback for us then, that you get it done. As Conor said, do all that documentation. Conor didn't get to go to that particular gig either, but he had run through and managed that whole documentation process. He figured out the stuff they needed. We had developed it. He had submitted it, and it gave him that satisfaction when we got the go-ahead to do the gig, even though he didn't get to even go on the ground for that gig. It was a really small team. So there's the satisfaction in just getting the license and getting the go-ahead as well. And if you're a bit nerdy like us, that's one stage of satisfaction. Seeing people happy at the show is another stage. You know, the same individual may not always see both stages, but if you enjoy the challenge of both ends of it, it's always worth taking on then, I think.
100%. And I relived that satisfaction, I guess, when I was building this presentation, because when I was looking for a photo, I could not figure out if I was looking at a render or an actual photo of the gig. I was just going, how does it look like that? How is this real? Is it not?
Yeah, that particular gig was so similar to renders and designs. What they achieved on that gig was phenomenal. I didn't get to see it properly either. Martin had to fly for 2.5 days to get there. It's a horrible place to get to. And Martin still says he'd go back in the morning for a gig because it's just so stunning. And again, that's part of that payoff too. Martin didn't get too caught up in the documentation. He had to go with the team and figure out how to run the gig on the ground. And it was an amazing experience for him too. And he wouldn't have got to do that if someone, in this case Conor, someone hadn't done all the work on documentation, had gotten it past the post, gotten the permissions, and furnished Martin and the rest of the team with, here's the documentation, here's the outline of how to run the show and what we said we'd do. And that's what Martin was able to take forward, and they were able to run a show on the back of that then. So it's not often seen as the exciting part of what we do. It's wholly necessary for lots of reasons. And if you're lucky enough to have someone like Conor on the team who gets that thrill out of getting all these things sorted and proving to people we know what we're doing, there can be great satisfaction on the genuinely on the documentation side. There can be. Sorry, Adnan, I'm just reading your second question. I feel like I'm fobbing you off, but there's, again, I can't answer that. There's more context needed. I can't, we would need to know a lot more to give you an answer on a limit for elevation. Yeah, I would. Yeah, we'd need to know more. Sorry, there's no simple answers to something like that. If you can, I would say no elevation would be good elevation. But I presume you're asking the question because that's not an option. That's not something we could tell you without knowing a whole lot more about what you're trying to achieve, my friend. I'm sorry.
100%. And even with more knowledge, we'd probably tie in with our structural engineer bodies over there for further go ahead on something like that. So I'd say if you have a structural engineer you use, reach out to them. If not, I'd say.
I can only assume if you're asking about elevation, there's a level of elevation that you might not be comfortable with. And if you're in that space, I think get an engineering company to give you a professional opinion on it is the safest thing to do, even if they don't come in and do some work for you beyond giving you an opinion. If you give them facts, elevations, site maps, and they can say that should be achievable, I would try and do that, because if you're asking about elevation at all, there's obviously something in your head that it might be on too much of a slope. So I would talk to engineers. Conor's right.
Okay, well, I think that seems to be everything in now. Conor, thanks a million. I think we got some really, really great feedback there. It seems to be really helpful for everyone. Mark, thank you as well for joining us. I'll be putting up the link to this recording on Friday, and I'll send out an email to everybody with that. I'll also include those links that Mark and I put up today with the email course as well as the diploma course. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again at the next one.
Thanks very much, Chrissy, for hosting and setting up, and thanks everyone for joining.
All right, bye guys.